Good afternoon and welcome to Matters Financial and Geopolitical from a Frontier, and I appreciate the support, I really do. Let me start with gold. In a Twitter exchange at the end of last week, I said I would venture that gold is correlated to the coronavirus, which is set to turn parabolic and is already non-linear and exponential. Or as that great French thinker Paul Virilio described it, has escape velocity. Now this is the gold price. We're currently at 1647. We got much higher, just shy of 1700, and then we've traded down. We've found a lot of buy support at 1634 area. And I think once we've churned around a bit, we're going to surge once more. The long end of the US yield curve has entered the zone of lowest ever. Expect that to be the new normal. The show has just begun. That's a comment from Anil Vora, and the chart is from David Inglis. And this is what I was referring to on the 27th of January, when I said investors dived into safe havens. Next week we could see these moves turn parabolic. And indeed, that's what we're witnessing now. And of course, the best definition of the parabola was by Thomas Pynchon. It is a curve each of them feels unmistakably. It is the parabola. They must have guessed once or twice, guessed and refused to believe that everything always collectively had been moving forward toward that purified shape latent in the sky, that shape of no surprise, no second chance, no return. This is from Bianco Research, falling 10-year rates. Nouriel wrote a thought leader in the Financial Times with which I could not agree more. He says markets remain complacent about coronavirus despite sell-off. Investors are deluding themselves about how severe the coronavirus outbreak will be. Despite this week's big sell-off in equity markets, the worst is yet to come. First, the complacency was based on a number of flawed assumptions. First, that the epidemic would be contained mostly to China rather than becoming a global pandemic. We're approximately 50 countries, I think, now. Secondly, that it would be contained and peak before the end of the first quarter, thus limiting the economic damage to China and the global economy. Third, that the growth would be V-shaped with a strong rebound in the second quarter and beyond. Fourth, that policymakers, both monetary and fiscal, would take strong early actions to support economies and markets if things were to weaken significantly. This is little compared to what would happen if the contagion truly hits the US, which is likely given the long latency of the disease. The idea of a V-shaped recovery is nonsensical. If its output shrinks only 2% in quarter one, that is an annualized contraction of 8%, a V-shaped rebound would require the same annualized growth which exceeds the 6% that China managed before the virus. Assuming that China will rebound at this rate in the final 3 quarters of the year, which would imply growth in 2020 of 4%, is heroically optimistic. It is more likely that a V-shape shows growth returning to pre-virus annualized level of 6% from the second quarter onwards. In this case, China's calendar year growth would be 2.5%, and I don't even think that's going to happen. Compare both the rosy and more realistic scenario with current market expectations, which have revised growth estimates for China from 6% to 5.5%, and you can see how markets are still delusional. Central banks are running out of bullets. How much more negative can the European Central Bank, Bank of Japan, and others go on rates? This coronavirus outbreak is mostly a negative supply shock that reduces growth, increases costs and inflation, with some side effects for aggregate demand. Monetary policy cannot resolve negative supply shocks. And I think that is the best article I've read in terms of capturing where we're headed. 24th of February, in my last iteration, I said what is becoming increasingly clear is that the world economists and policymakers are as linear in their thinking as Xi Jinping and are flummoxed by the exponential multiplicative nature of the virus. Saying China is returning to work is like saying last week you were the only one in the 500-seat IMAX to watch that anti-Japanese Chinese war movie. This week there are 2 of you. Yes, technically more. That's Balding's world. And essentially, if China returns to work, it's no different telling your frontline doctors, don't wear hazmat suits, it will panic the public. It's a trap, because they're all going to reinfect each other, and this time round it will be worse. And as I said on the 24th of February, whether it's the WHO, the IMF, the PBOC, these near-term forecasts are in the land of the theatre of the absurd. And now what is clear is we're dealing with a virus that has turned exponential and non-linear, and it is a pandemic. And I'll come to the definition of what a pandemic is in a moment. Home Thoughts, 13th century Westminster retable, England's oldest altarpiece, shows Christ holding a globe of the world with images of the sun and moon, trees, sheep and birds, and that's from Westminster Abbey. And I like this from William Dalrymple, the Gandharan Aphrodite, Dharmajika Stupa, Taxila Gandhara, 1st century AD. And it's actually incredibly sensual, isn't it? Political reflections. I've written about Narendra Modi's politics of ethnocratic nationalism. I'm not going to go over what's been going on. It's just so horrendous. But I'll revert back to Rana Ayub's article in the New Yorker and just draw out some salient points. He was, of course, the chief minister of the Gujarati government. He'd been appointed to the position 5 months before. As the riots accelerated in Gujarat, Modi became invisible. No different to what he's been doing again here, except for the event at the stadium and with Trump. No sectarian riot ever happens in India unless the government wants it, Manda told me. This was a state-sponsored massacre. If we raise the self-respect and morale of 50 million Gujaratis, he said, the schemes of Alis, Malis and Jamalis will not be able to do us any harm. The crowd let out a cheer. In 2007, when Modi appeared on CNN-IBN, journalist Karan Thapar asked him, why can't you say that you regret the killings? What I have to say, I have said at that time, Modi replied, his face hardening. Modi grew agitated. I have to rest, he said. I need some water. And then Modi showed her copies of Barack Obama's books. He said, Maithili, look at this. I want to be like him someday, she recalled. She was struck by his canniness. I thought Modi was either going to be Prime Minister or he was going to jail. Amit Shah, Modi's deputy, told a group of election workers that the party's social media networks were an unstoppable force. Do you understand what I'm saying? He said. We are capable of delivering any message we want to the public, whether sweet or sour, true or fake. And I think that's an important point about populism and its latest iteration. I think the fact that you can broadcast OTT over the top has been the defining difference in terms of messaging the base and controlling the base. And to wit, his point is any message we want to the public, whether sweet or sour, true or fake. The accelerated growth was a fantastically crafted fiction, according to Prasad, the former editor. India's 2020 and 2021 GDP forecast, this is from D. Lakal IA. Okay, let's return to the coronavirus. Latest 2,801 deaths and over 82,000 cases globally. US reports first case with no ties to known outbreak. A expert, whom I don't know and whom I believe is wrong, sees the epidemic contained by the end of April. Saudi Arabia halts religious visits, and Chinese leaders, including Xi, donate their own money. As I concluded in my latest article, what is absolutely clear now is that we're dealing with a virus that has turned exponential and non-linear and is a pandemic. And really, my level of disappointment with Tedros and his WHO is unfathomable. Date of the first case outside of mainland China, and since then, and this was yesterday, we've got a total of 44 countries where the infection has spread. That's from YXLearn. A pandemic refers to the spread of a disease worldwide, and it's in every continent except Antarctica, or over a significant proportion of the world, generally considered to be 2 or more continents. This is from Alexandra Phelan. Spread is more than just cases in a country, but transmission. WHO uses 4 phases. Pandemic is simply global spread, with severity risk assessed separately. Spread is more than just cases in a country, but transmission. WHO pandemic guidance no longer delineates between limited sustained human-to-human transmission. Rather, WHO uses 4 phases. Pandemic is simply global spread with severity risk assessed separately. Dr. Eric Ding, quoting Dr. Tedros, "I feel like networked, multi-sited epidemic system suspiciously sounds like a P word that I know. But what do I know? I only stayed at a Holiday Inn Express last night." As the lead global health agency, folks are likely waiting for Dr. Tedros to make the statement of fact first. Alexandra Phelan. And this is from Gordis Epidemiology and shows you the high level and descriptive nature of the term pandemic from an epidemic perspective. I have no doubt we're past the point of no return. I have no doubt this is an unprecedented moment. And as I wrote on the 3rd of February, it's clear to anybody that we've hit a non-linear and exponential phase. Richard Engel, if you see one cockroach, you know there are more. I think we massively overestimate the intelligence of our leaders because in part of the adulatory media echo chamber, and that this virus is showing us that our leaders are linear, behind the curve, and deluded. And what is also increasingly clear is that the world's economists and policymakers are as linear in their thinking as Xi Jinping and are flummoxed by the exponential multiplicative nature of the virus. Xi has extensive experience at silencing viral ideas, but controlling an actual virus itself is outside his experience. So at the very least, we can say he's playing a high-risk game, and specifically in the underreporting. They stamped down on any reports in December. It looks as if it started in November, and by that stage it had already gone non-linear in China. The data points we're getting just don't stack up. They are hocus pocus. And for President Trump, it is a mirror image of the risk and traps he fell into head first. You dilly-dally, talk about the flu, listen to Rush Limbaugh, and you get skewered, and it remains non-linear and exponential. There's always a tweet, I go back to October 2014, Obama just appointed an Ebola czar with zero experience in the medical area and zero experience in infectious disease control. A total joke, he tweeted. Then I saw this from Dr. Dina Grayson. In all seriousness, I fear that Mike Pence is not capable of leading the sort of comprehensive science-based response to the coronavirus pandemic that we need. Borowitz report, in always tongue-in-cheek, Trump said on Wednesday that he was planning to destroy the coronavirus by sending an incredibly mean tweet in its direction. Said he was already in the process of crafting insults about the virus that would obliterate it once and for all. In a preview of the mean tweet he is devising, Trump said the thing about the virus is it's incredibly small. It's smaller than Mike Bloomberg. Once I point that out, that the coronavirus won't know what hit it. He added he was also in the process of coming up with an insulting nickname for the virus. It was going to be something about how small it is, he said. Something like little micro mini virus. I'm still working on it, but it's going to be so mean, you won't believe how mean it's going to be. Trump was dismissive of the scientists who have raised dire concerns about the virus in recent days. These so-called experts are the same people who said I needed sunglasses to stare at the eclipse, he said. Tongue-in-cheek, of course. I take you back to the 7th of October because that was more serious. And I said the world, and I was writing about China at 70. In the 21st century exhibits viral, wildfire and exponential characteristics and feedback loops which only become obvious in hindsight. And my argument would be that this applies to Trump as well, because a non-linear and exponential virus represents the greatest risk to a control machine in point of fact. I take you back to Epsilon Theory's recent article, and one of his conclusions was what exponential disease propagation looks like in the real world. Real world exponential growth looks like nothing, 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 then cluster, 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 then boom. If I had COVID-19, I want to be treated in China, said Bruce Aylward, head of the independent WHO-China Joint Mission on COVID-19 at a press briefing in Geneva on Tuesday, shortly after he returned from China. And as I said, WHO is captured, millions of lives have been trifled with, the game is up, and Bruce Aylward is another example of that. This extremely odd statement coming from a WHO official perfectly reflects what Kuzat Alte said. WHO has failed to deliver their mission and instead acted like the spokesperson for China. That was via William Yang. I take it back to Beidou's poem, Let Me Tell You, World, I Do Not Believe. If 1,000 challenges lie beneath your feet, count me as number 1,001. I don't believe the sky is blue. I don't believe in thunder's echoes. I don't believe that dreams are false. I don't believe that death has no revenge. Groucho Marx, who are you going to believe, me or your own eyes? As of February 25th, the Shandong government stated that there were a total of 755 infections in the province. This is Epoch Times. but internal documents showed that 1,992 people had tested positive for the virus via nucleic acid testing as of Feb 23. And that is the problem with the Chinese statistics in a nutshell. I'm not going to go into all of them, but there's practically evidence for manipulation across the board. Chinese medical staff request international medical assistance in fighting against COVID-19. This is in the Lancet. It's very sad. We need much more help. We're asking nurses and medical staff from countries around the world to come to China now to help us in this battle. It's very sad. 14% of recovered coronavirus patients in China's Guangdong province tested positive again. That's another curveball. My brother is an earth scientist. I asked him if there's hope for the planet. He said, we are FUCKED. There is plastic in the Arctic, and put his head in his hands. Naomi R. Wolf. As I said, it certainly feels like a decade of semiotic arousal when everything it seemed was a sign, a harbinger of some future radical disjuncture or cataclysmic upheaval. After decades of travel in the far north, E360's Arctic correspondent joins a voyage through Northwest Passage, witnesses a world being transformed, with ice disappearing, balmy temperatures becoming common, and alien invaders from plastic waste to new diseases on the rise. I joined the Northwest Passage project on its 18-day, 2,000 nautical mile icebreaker journey from Greenland through the high Canadian Arctic. For me, having spent 40 years traveling extensively in the Arctic, the voyage was another unsettling reminder that the region has gone well beyond a climate change tipping point and is now transforming into a new state, as a Queen's University geographer put it. Hundreds of beluga in Elwin Bay showed the Arctic is still a region teeming with marine animals and abundant bird life. It was thrilling to see other whale species such as tusked narwhal diving and giant bowheads blowing water 20 feet into the air. Watching long-tailed jaegers ceaselessly bullying kittiwakes to force them to disgorge a meal of fish was spellbinding. The Arctic is currently experiencing the fastest warming on Earth and dramatic changes in water chemistry. Ocean acidification puts the entire Arctic food web at risk. The rate of change challenges even the most adaptable of organisms. July temperatures in Greenland soared up to 18 degrees Fahrenheit above normal. As it turned out, this July proved to be the hottest month ever recorded on the planet. Nearly 2 billion tons of ice on the Greenland ice cap melted last week. A record 55 billion tons disappeared from July 30 to August 3. Wildfires, which until a few years ago were virtually unheard of in Greenland, were burning the tundra, both there and across the Arctic, at a record rate. Indeed, grizzly bears are extending their reach hundreds of miles from the mainland of the Western Arctic, sometimes even mating with polar bears. As I said in November 2015, I cannot help feeling we're like frogs in boiling water. We have created massive interference in the cosmic fine-tuning phenomenon. Here you see the icebreaker Oden sailing through first-year ice in Lancaster Sound in the Canadian Arctic last month. 30th of September last year, I was talking about the end being nigh. Microscopic particles of plastic trapped in sea ice. A polar bear in the Barrow Strait. As summer sea ice disappears in the high Arctic, polar bears are losing crucial platforms on which to hunt and rest. I called it in that September article the feedback loop and the risks of dieback, where we enter a phase of cascading system collapse. A film crew from the Oden explores Cunningham Inlet, which historically would have been blocked by the sea ice in July. Let's move on to currency markets. Euro dollar has been trading higher, 109.14. It's going to peter out soon. Dollar index 98.878, about to turn higher, I'm sure. Japanese yen 110.18. Swiss franc 0.9730. The pound 129.24. The Australian dollar 0.6561. India rupee 71.625. The Korean won 1215.87. Brazilian real, fresh all-time low, 445. Egyptian pound, 15.6. And the rand, 15.267. Dollar index, obviously people are pricing in lower interest rates, and that's softened it up a little bit. But, you know, the knee-jerk reaction, reflexive action is to buy the dollar in times of trouble. And times of trouble are here. Euro dollar, 109.14, but again, I expect that to peter out as well. Commodity markets, wow, crude oil, $48.20, came under phenomenal selling pressure, broken through to 12-month lows, and looks to me as if it's going to $40. Sub-Saharan Africa, health worker at the Kotoka International Airport in Accra, Ghana, checking the temperature of a traveller on Jan 30, 2020. Upon screening, travellers fall into one of four categories: symptomatic but unaware of exposure, aware but asymptomatic, symptomatic and aware, and neither symptomatic nor aware. If someone doesn't realise they've been exposed and doesn't yet show symptoms, then they are fundamentally undetectable. Dr. Kathleen Gostich. We estimate that on average screening will miss about 2/3 of infected travellers. Daily Beast, what is most troubling of all is the situation, or curious lack thereof, in Africa. Prevailing theory about Africa is that a lack of medical facilities and testing capacity may mean the virus is spreading silently. I think the average number of tests in each sub-Saharan African country is around 20. The WHO has been working to get testing kits and other preparedness measures in place in Africa for when, not if, the virus takes hold. 27th of January, I said I have to assume that the coronavirus is already in Africa, but just not diagnosed. I said that's a racing certainty. 3rd of February, I was talking about Bole Airport in Ethiopia, which is receiving 6 flights daily from China every day. And I called it the epicenter of China-Africa connectedness. I then went to a Zero Hedge article in which he said this could mean super spreaders during incubation period, undetected by temperature readings or showing no symptoms, likely invaded Africa from China. On average, 1,500 passengers per day arrive from China. Ethiopia scans all passengers from Asia for symptoms, which essentially means taking their temperature. Bill Gates said this disease, when it comes to Africa, will be more dramatic than in China, and I don't want to play down what is happening in China. To wit, 239 passengers arrived in Nairobi yesterday aboard a China Southern flight cleared of coronavirus and were advised to self-quarantine for 14 days. Bill Gates, Ebola is terrible, but it's not like a lightning flu. J. Kyle Bass, China's Southern Airliner from Guangdong, hotbed with second most infections in China, landing in Kenya today. Africa can't protect itself from this kind of virus. CCP has control of Kenyan government, reckless behavior from the Chinese communists, and Africa can't protect itself. 3rd of February, I was talking about the decision by Fly Ethiopian to continue flying 6 flights to China and back, and I said universities and scholars will study the date, the time, the reasoning, the political leverage deployed, and the asymmetric power balance that led to this. Burundi, le chef de l'État, Nkurunziza, presides over a council of ministers. That was yesterday, on the same day that 22 people were killed by security forces on the outskirts of Bujumbura. IMF urges Congo's central bank to stop lending to the government. In December, the IMF approved a credit injection of about $370 million to support the reserves, which it said were at critically low levels. Gross debt to GDP now reaching 71.6% by 2022-2023 compared to 2019 forecast of 59.7%. Wow. Debt service cost at 15.2% of revenue. That's South Africa. South African All Shares down 3.57% in 2020. I've written about the China EM frontier feedback loop phenomenon, and I've said the Rand is the purest proxy for that phenomenon. This is dollar Rand, last at 15.27. Of course, Tito made a great speech, and he has tremendous personality and capacity to calm the markets, but he's not going to eventually, and the Rand will hit 15.50 and then go much higher. Egyptian pound at 15.60, EGX30 minus 5.45% so far this year. Nigerian All Share up 0.49% this year, but it's going to get walloped because of the oil price. Ghana Stock Exchange Composite Index down 3.4% year to date. The cost of fighting desert locusts in East Africa has doubled. Each day more countries are affected, the FAO said. This week, for the first time since 1944, a swarm entered the Democratic Republic of Congo. Kenya, Uganda, Ethiopia, Somalia and South Sudan already have the pest threatening the most important crop of the year. Exodus 10, the plague of locusts. If you refuse to let them go, I will bring locusts into your country tomorrow. They will cover the face of the ground so that it cannot be seen. It certainly, as I said, feels like a decade of semiotic arousal. Kenya Power reported profit before tax declined 93.277%. Full-year revenue was up 1.341%. Operating profit down 11.623%. Earnings per share down 92.216%. Cash and cash equivalents at the close of the year negative 5.426 billion. However, then Mir interpreted these results. He says, please note that Kenya Power has not reported a profit of 262 million shillings. It has reported a loss of 8.3 billion. And then he looked through the results per FY18 release. In 2017, the balance sheet was 63.3 billion. 2018, 64.2. Equity as per full year 2019 release, 58.4 billion. Therefore, they're put through a loss, not through the P&L account, but by adjusting previous year's balance sheet of 8.3 billion, according to Mir. Negative working capital worsened to 71 billion from 56 billion. East African Portland Cement reported a half-year loss before tax of 1.634 billion. Revenue was up 8.121%. Cash and cash equivalents, negative 1.204 billion. The board is optimistic with the implementation of the company's medium-term plan. The company will return back to profitability in the short run. They've been saying that every year. I've read their results. Nairobi All Share down 8.41% this year, and NSE20 down 8.48% this year. Thank you for listening.